Latin 4. Here we go. 125. Livy, 125. So they've killed the pigs and struck the treaty. By the way, it's where we get the phrase strike a treaty, is because they literally would kill a thing to make the treaty. They used to kill a thing for all the things, so it was just, they didn't have buffets. Livy 125. Since the treaty was struck, the triplets, just as it was agreed, took up arms. When their own people on both sides encouraged them, they reminded them that the fatherly gods, their fatherlands, and their fathers, whatever of the citizens at home and whatever was in the army, were watching over them, or keeping guard of their arms and of their hands. And the triplets eagerly headed into the middle area between the two armies, ferociously in their own nature, and full of the voices encouraging them. Now here's the thing that Livy likes to do. He creates the audience, and then almost everything is played through the audience. So we don't really get to see the battle in what he talks about. He talks about the audience, okay? So you notice this is, he just went through like the liturgy of like, here are all the people that support you in your fight. The two armies on both sides sat around in front of their camps, free from immediate danger more than from concern. In fact, the power to rule was at stake and was dependent on the manliness and of the fate of so few. And so, therefore, attentive and uncertain, they directed attention set upon a spectacle that was minimally pleasing, or they turned their attention toward a dreadful spectacle. The signal was given, and the armed men began fighting just as if they were an army. 3 young men each ran around displaying the courage of great armies. It was not their own danger which swirled in the thoughts of these men, or of those men, so these men being Romans, those men being Albans, right? But the power or the servitude of the state, the fortune to come to their homeland, which they themselves would have decided. As the first clashing of weapons resounded and vibrated, the swords flashed, a huge horror touched the spectators, and as hope was inclined toward neither side, their voice and their spirit were sluggish. So they were kind of like their voice was caught in their throat, because like, oh, oh. Then, after the conflict had been joined, when now not only the motion of the bodies and the two-headed violent movements of their weapons and armors, but the wounds and also the blood were for the purpose of the spectacle, 2 Romans, one on top of the other, breathing their last, fell together, while the 3 Albans were wounded. So you finally get to them, right? You've got them going in there. But I love that idea of two-headedness of the whole thing. I always just kind of picture a fur ball, a dust ball, a scrum from cartoons, and where like you see a dog and a cat fighting each other. When the Alban army cheered at this fall of the men in joy, all hope, however, not yet the worries, now left the Roman legions, who were terrified of the fate of one whom the 3 Curiati had stood around. By chance he was unhurt. Just as he was in no way equal to all of them on his own, so he was formidable against them all in single combat. Therefore, so that he would separate the fight against them, he had taken to flight. Thus, he had thought to the extent that each man's body, those who had followed, was hampered by its own wounds, that would allow him to wound them who followed. Already he had fled a considerable distance from that place where the fight was, when looking back he saw them following with large gaps between them. One was not far from himself. He, the lone Horatius, turned against him, a Curiatus, and made a huge attack against him, the first Curiatus. And while the Alban army were shouting to the other Curiatii to bring aid to their brother, Horatius, already victorious, having slain his enemy, sought the second one. I actually translated this as was waiting in for the second fight. Like it just kind of felt a little more vibrant. Then, with the sort of shout that one expects of his supporters when something unhoped for has happened, I love that phrase, the Romans helped their soldier, right? So they're like, oh God, it's over. Wait, he won? Oh my God, he won. And then he is like, oh yes, here we go. Gets his second wind. And he hurried to discharge his obligation in the battle. And so before the other, who was not far off in the distance, was able to follow, he, Horatius, executed the second Horatius. And now, when the battle was on equal terms, the single fighters had remained, but neither equal in hope nor in vigor. Right? So one of them is wounded and has just seen his brothers get slain. The other one is on his way up. Like his kill is going up. The Horatius was making the other, the Horatius, who was uninjured in his body by weapons, eager with his double victory. For a certain third victory, the other Horatius, wearied by his wounds, dragging his weary body from running and overcome by the slaughter of his brothers before his eyes, was offered his conquering enemy. It is not a battle, or it was not a battle. The Roman, exulting, said, I gave 2 of your brothers to the spirits of the underworld, my brothers' ghosts. So I repaid my brothers' deaths. I will give the third for the sake of this war, so that the Romans shall rule the Albans. He drove his sword into the neck of the man, barely holding up his own weapons. So I kind of figured that the Horatius slumps to his knees and he's just done in by his wounds. And Horatius stabs him down the back of the neck. That's what's called a clean death. It's a soldier's death. And if the guy's already in front of you, you get to have a cool speech, right? Otherwise, it's a little weird to go thrusty through the neck, but either way. He stripped the man lying dead. The Romans welcomed Horatius, celebrating and rejoicing, with the joy all the greater, since the situation had been near to despair. So, they went from the deaths to, they started from the bottom, now they're here. From there, they were turned, both sides, toward burying of their own. So, both armies turned toward burying their own people. And by no means equal in mind, indeed, since one side had been made greater in power, while the other has been made subject to a foreign rule. The tombs stand in the place where each one fell, now. Now for Livy. 2 Roman tombs were in one place closer to Alba, and the 3 Alban tombs looked toward Rome. But the tombs are distant from each other, as the fighting had also been. So that's 25. The battle's over, but the intrigue is not. Now, when I was in Rome this last summer, we stayed at a villa one night, and it overlooked Lake Alba. And over the mountain, the other way, behind it, was the field on which they had fought. When I go back in another summer, not this coming summer, because that would be silly. When I go back next summer, though, I'm hoping to actually stand on that field. That's what I'd wanted to do, but instead, we forgot to pray to Hermes or something before we went over, and we got stuck in Washington, D.C. But there you go. So that's the battle. The next chapter is even weirder. All right, I'm going to hit the button.